Hello students, this is a video tutorial explaining how to write a narrative from another character's point of view, and this is just providing some modeled examples for you on what to do and also what not to do. But first we need to read the passage here, and this is an excerpt from a story called Miriam, and I'm just putting this out there. I did not choose this passage. It was on another standardized test, and this is just what we're working with. It's not that exciting of a story, but what my students did is turned it into something that was really interesting. So I think you have a lot of potential with ideas here. So let's read the reading passage first. For several years, Mrs. H.T. Miller lived alone in a pleasant apartment, 2 rooms with kitchenette, in a remodeled brownstone near the East River. She was a widow. Mr. H.T. Miller had left a reasonable amount of insurance. Her interests were narrow. She had no friends to speak of, and she rarely journeyed farther than the corner grocery. The other people in the house never seemed to notice her. Her clothes were matter of fact, her hair iron gray, clipped and casually waved. She did not use cosmetics. Her features were plain and inconspicuous, and on her last birthday, she was 61. Her activities were seldom spontaneous. She kept the 2 rooms immaculate, smoked on an occasional cigarette, prepared her own meals, and tended a canary. Okay, so we have a very boring woman at the start of a boring story. Then she met Miriam. It was snowing that night. Mrs. Miller had finished drying the supper dishes and was thumbing through an afternoon paper when she saw an advertisement of a picture playing at a neighborhood theater. The title sounded good, so she struggled into her beaver coat, laced her galoshes, and left the apartment, leaving one light burning in the foyer. She found nothing more disturbing than a sensation of darkness. The snow was fine, falling gently, not yet making an impression on the pavement. The wind from the river cut only at street crossings. Mrs. Miller hurried, her head bowed, oblivious as a mole burrowing a blind path. She stopped at a drugstore and bought a package of peppermints. A long line stretched in front of the box office. She took her place at the end. There would be, a tired voice groaned, a short wait for all seats. Mrs. Miller rummaged in her leather handbag till she collected exactly the correct change for admission. The line seemed to be taking its own time, and looking around for some distractions, she suddenly became conscious of a little girl standing under the edge of the marquee. Her hair was the longest and strangest Mrs. Miller had ever seen, absolutely silver white, like an albino's. It flowed waist-length in smooth, loose lines. She was thin and fragilely constructed. There was a simple, special elegance in the way she stood with her thumbs in the pockets of a tailored plum velvet coat. Mrs. Miller felt oddly excited, and when the little girl glanced towards her, she smiled warmly. The little girl walked over and said, "Would you care to do me a favor?" "I'd be glad if I can," said Mrs. Miller. "Oh, it's quite easy. I merely want you to buy a ticket for me. They won't let me in otherwise. Here, I have the money." And gracefully she handed Mrs. Miller 2 dimes and a nickel. They went over the theater together, and usherette directed them to the lounge. In 20 minutes, the picture would be over. "I feel just like a genuine criminal," said Mrs. Miller gaily as she sat down. "I mean, that sort of thing's against the law, isn't it? I do hope I haven't done the wrong thing. Your mother knows where you are, dear. I mean, she does, doesn't she?" The little girl said nothing. She unbuttoned her coat and folded it across her lap. Her dress underneath was prim and dark blue. A gold chain dangled about her neck, and her fingers, sensitive and musical looking, toyed with it. Examining her more attentively, Mrs. Miller decided the true distinctive feature was not her hair, but her eyes. They were hazel, steady, lacking any childlike quality whatsoever, and because of their size, seemed to consume her small face. Mrs. Miller offered a peppermint. "What's your name, dear?" "Miriam," she said, as though in some curious way it were information already familiar. "Why, isn't that funny? My name's Miriam, too, and it's not a terribly common name either. Now, don't tell me your last name's Miller." "Just Miriam. But isn't that funny?" "Moderately," said Miriam, and rolled a peppermint on her tongue. Okay, now the students that did this prompt also had a video that took place later on in the story, and this woman, Mrs. Miller, invites Miriam back to her apartment, okay? Now, I had some students do some really interesting things, and I'm thinking back, Isaac, you actually had the girl Miriam be like the ghost of the older woman or something, didn't you? Something like that. One student did. So they were actually the same person, okay? That Mrs. Miller was imagining Miriam as like a childlike version of her, okay? So that's interesting, I thought. So this is what Kayla did in her retelling of the story, okay? And this time she was telling it from Miriam's perspective. "My name is Miriam. I don't quite remember my last name. I guess that's what happens when you die." I think that opening line is really powerful. You want to know why and why she's still telling her story. You remember bits and pieces of your life before. I died in 1930 in a theater from a gunshot. We were watching a play, me and my mother, while Father was working. Then out of nowhere, this man climbed on stage and started yelling at an actor and an actress. I didn't hear much, but I heard words like, "You cheated on me, and I'll kill everyone." After that, he started firing. He killed the two on stage, then started firing into the crowd until all of a sudden I got really cold and everything got blurry. It took me 4 or 5 years for me to realize that I had died. It's 1941 now, and after a while, you get lonely. I haven't been able to talk to anyone in 11 years. No one has been able to see me until today. I was hanging out outside of the theater where I died when I saw a lady looking at me from the corner of my eye. I figured that she was looking past me, but I don't know everything about the stare she was giving me. I just know someone finally saw me. I wanted to speak to her, but I didn't know what to say. I got really scared, so when I did build up the courage to go and talk to her, I knew that if I told her about all of this, she wouldn't believe me. So I decided to act like a normal child, but there is something that changes in you when you have been dead as long as I have. You start to become Maleficent. Do you know? Maleficent. Thank you. Breaking out the big words here, Kayla. Now I lost my place. After a while, you start to have a hatred grow in you for people, for not being able to see you, for having a life and growing old. I think that's what attracted me to this lady, the fact that she was old. She got to live a long life. She didn't have to suffer watching everyone around her grown while she stayed the same age. I hated her for it. I wanted her dead because of it. When I approached, I tried to hide my hatred, and I did for a while, until I followed her to her house. Then, when I saw where she lived, how she lived, I wanted it. I wanted it all. So I knocked on the door. I was there to kill her, but I wanted to scare her first. So I did. I touched her things when she told me not to, then disappeared. I went into her bedroom and wanted to take her things. So I found something I liked and took it. She asked me to leave, but I wasn't finished, but I left anyway. I will be back, but next time she won't be leaving the house.
Wow.
Okay. Kayla took a really kind of boring, simple story and turned it into something very interesting. And she told it from the girl's point of view. Okay. And I think a lot of my students thought like the white hair and the like really mature eyes and stuff kind of creeped them out about this story. Okay. I also want to give an example of what not to do. Okay. And I saw a lot of students do this, and I was actually kind of surprised. I had a lot of students actually not tell it from someone else's point of view. They just retold the story in a summary. Do not do that, okay? Miriam was going to a local theater. When she arrived, she got in line to buy a ticket. When it was her turn to pay for the ticket, she was told that she was too young to buy a ticket. The woman said if you want inside the theater, she needs to be accompanied by an adult. She was explaining to the woman that she did not have her mom. The woman proceeded to tell her to please move out of line and don't come back without an adult. She was sad and was standing underneath the marquee. She wasn't sure what she was going to do. Then she looked around and saw a woman looking back at her. Miriam got an idea. She went over to the woman and asked the woman if she could buy a ticket. The woman gladly agreed to buy a ticket for her, and Miriam handed her the money. Okay? Now, the point of view does shift here. Okay? We go from third person limited from Mrs. Miller's perspective to third person limited from Miriam's perspective. Okay, but you need to be retelling it from the character's point of view, which means you need to move to first person. Okay, we should be hearing I and I and I. Okay, and you also don't want to just summarize the story. Okay, you want to create your own story. You're using your first story to help you find details for your retelling. Okay, but you can add stuff to your story. In fact, Kayla was asking me yesterday, she's doing the Glass Castle, if she can tell the story from the nurse's point of view in that story. And that's going to mean that she's going to have to create a lot of other details to go along with her story that isn't in the first story. Okay? Does that kind of make sense or help you kind of brainstorm? I don't want to see all these dead characters though. Okay? Like, don't redo this. But think about how you can be creative and retell this story in a different way. Because it's a different person and different people tell the story in different ways. Okay. Now I have to stop my... not good at stopping this here. Okay. Now I have to stop my... not good at stopping this here. Okay. Now I have to stop my... not good at stopping this here. Okay. Now I have to stop my... not good at stopping this here. Okay. Now I have to stop my... not good at stopping this here. Okay. Now I have to stop my... not good at stopping this here. Okay. Now I have to stop my... not good at stopping this here. Okay. Now I have to stop my... not good at stopping this here. Okay. Now I have to stop my... not good at stopping this here. Okay. Now I have to stop my... not good at stopping this here. Okay. Now I have to stop my... not good at stopping this here. Okay. Now I have to stop my... not good at stopping this here. Okay. Now I have to stop my... not good at stopping this here. Okay. Now I have to stop my... not good at stopping this here. Okay. Now I have to stop my... not good at stopping this here. Okay. Now I have to stop my... not good at stopping this here. Okay. Now I have to stop my... not good at stopping this here. Okay. Now I have to stop my... not good at stopping this here. Okay. Now I have to stop my... not good at stopping this here. Okay. Now I have to stop my... not good at sto All right, so you all are going to be working on that. Ella asked how much longer we'll be working on this. We'll have a few more days. I'll try to gauge